Hi, I'm Lina. Welcome to Lina's Storybook, where we share the most unforgettable audio novels. Let's get started.
In my previous life, I fled my violently abusive husband, taking my daughter into hiding and begging her to keep our new address a secret. She promised she would, but the moment my back was turned, she texted him our exact location. I was brutally mortally injured on the cold floor of a cheap rental apartment. And my daughter, she stood before the reporters, weeping crocodile tears, claiming I was at fault because she just wanted a complete family. Fine, I thought as the darkness of death took me. In this life, you and your perfect father deserve each other. The metallic hum of the Chicago suburbs outside my window felt entirely wrong. Just moments ago, I was gasping for my final breath. My ribs shattered under the heavy steel-toed boots of my husband, Greg Thomas, but as I gasped for air, my eyes snapped open to the sight of my own bedroom. Bathed in the soft golden light of a Tuesday afternoon, I was kneeling on the hardwood floor, my hands trembling violently over an open half-packed Samsonite suitcase. The shock of the transition hit me like a physical blow. The phantom pain of a ruptured spleen and a fractured skull still echoed in my nerve endings, making me nauseous. I looked down at my hands unbruised, unbroken. I looked at the calendar on the nightstand. It was exactly 2 days before the night I died. The memories of my previous life rushed in. A horrific tidal wave of grief and betrayal. Greg Thomas was a monster masquerading as a charming Metropolitan Transit driver. Behind closed doors, he was a ruthless, sadistic abuser who not only beat me relentlessly, but constantly threatened to harm both me and our daughter if I ever dared to utter the word divorce. In my past life, desperate to escape his reign of terror, I had seized an opportunity when he was out drinking with his poker buddies. I packed whatever I could carry and fled with our 8-year-old daughter, Chloe, to a quiet neighborhood in Seattle. Terrified of being tracked down, I had completely severed ties with my old life, changing my phone number and cutting off every relative and friend. I had begged Chloe, practically on my hands and knees, never to contact her father again. She had nodded so sweetly, her big blue eyes full of innocent compliance. Yet, the very first chance she got, she quietly sent Greg a text message saying she missed her daddy. Greg had easily coaxed our exact address out of her, hopped on the first flight, and hunted us down that very night. He kicked down the door of our rental, his face twisted in a demonic rage, and beat me until I collapsed and lost my life. My death had caused a massive uproar in the local media. When the reporters shoved their microphones into Chloe's face, my sweet innocent daughter had cried pitifully for the cameras. "What did I do wrong? I just wanted a complete family," she had sobbed. "If Mommy hadn't secretly run away, Daddy wouldn't have gotten so mad and hit her so hard." Later, during the trial, she stood on the witness stand and testified in Greg's defense. Because of her testimony, the court ruled that Greg had accidentally killed me in a fit of passion, dropping the murder charges down to manslaughter and domestic abuse. He was sentenced to a mere 5 years in prison. By the time he was released, Chloe was a teenager. The two of them lived a blissful, happy life together, completely forgetting the woman who had sacrificed everything to protect them. I had spent my entire adult life acting as a human shield, enduring unspeakable agony, only to realize I had birthed the very knife that stabbed me in the back. But heaven had eyes. By some miraculous twist of fate, I had been reborn. A wave of pure, unadulterated hatred surged from the deepest corners of my soul, making my whole body shake with a violent tremor. The fury was so thick I could taste it in the back of my throat, like copper. Just then, the bedroom door was pushed open from the hallway. In walked Chloe, her blonde hair tied up in a neat little ponytail, her school backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder. She took one look at the half-packed suitcase on the floor, and her small brow furrowed into a deep, annoyed frown. Her tone dripped with a condescension that no 8-year-old should possess. "Mom, are you seriously going to drag me out of the house to run away again?" she demanded. Before I could even process the audacity of her words, she stepped forward and kicked the suitcase toward the wall. Without waiting for my response, she rolled her eyes and continued her tirade. "Mom, You are way too fragile. You have zero thick skin, she scoffed. Dad works so hard out there every day to make money for us. It's not easy for him. He was just in a bad mood and hit you a couple of times. And here you go making a massive drama out of it. So what if we run away? When Dad finds us, you're just going to get beaten up again anyway. Hearing those exact same cold, heartless words fall from her lips in this life made my heart plummet into my stomach. Was it possible? My brain raced to catch up with the terrifying suspicion blooming in my chest. The hatred was too deep, the realization too sharp to keep inside. Before I could even filter my thoughts, the question tore its way out of my throat. It was you. Every single time. You were the one who told Greg where we were hiding, weren't you? Chloe froze. Perhaps she was startled by the raw, unhinged ferocity in my eyes. A look I had never once directed at her in my entire life. The irritation vanished from her face, replaced by a flicker of defensive panic. She instinctively took 2 steps back. Well, if I don't tell him right away while he is still cooling off, do you expect me to just be homeless forever? She muttered, crossing her arms. So that was it. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, suffocating me with its cruel logic. In the past, whenever Greg had beaten me black and blue, I would pack up Chloe and flee to my parents' old house. After they passed away, and my estranged brother sold the property, I had nowhere left to go. I resorted to dragging my daughter to cheap, obscure motels on the edge of the state, praying we would be invisible. But no matter how far we drove, no matter how remote the town, Greg would always show up. I used to agonize over how a completely average city transit driver had the resources and the network to track me down like a fugitive. I thought he was invincible. I thought he was a god. It turned out the surveillance system was sleeping in the bed next to me. The little traitor had been tipping him off the entire time. Old grudges and new hatred collided in my veins, sparking an inferno I could no longer suppress. With a primal surge of adrenaline, I lunged forward and slapped her across the face with everything I had. The crack of my palm against her cheek echoed sharply in the bedroom. The little traitor never in a million years expected her doting, submissive mother to strike her. She stumbled back, clutching her reddening cheek, her eyes blazing with absolute venom. You hit me, she shrieked. You're damn right I did, I roared. Without hesitation, I delivered 2 more stinging slaps to her face. Watching the bright red welts form in the shape of my fingers on her skin, the crushing pressure in my chest finally eased just a fraction. You ungrateful, soulless little monster, I hissed through gritted teeth. Get out. She glared at me, her chest heaving. Even though she was only 8 years old, the vicious, feral expression twisting her features was a carbon copy of Greg Thomas, right before he threw a punch. I didn't want to look at her for another second. I planted my foot squarely in her chest and kicked her out into the hallway, terrified that if she stayed in my line of sight, I might actually strangle the little sociopath with my bare hands. I slammed the bedroom door shut and locked it. Outside, she immediately burst into theatrical wails, kicking the wooden panels with her sneakers. Just you wait, she screamed at the top of her lungs. I'm going to call Dad right now and tell him to come home and teach you a lesson. Wait. Oh, I would wait. All right, I would wait and watch how this precious little darling fared under the heavy fists of her misogynistic, abusive father once her human meat shield was permanently removed. I looked down at the half-packed suitcase. Most of the items inside were Chloe's her favorite pink dresses, her stuffed animals, her organic snacks, her expensive hair accessories. I had spent nearly a decade playing the role of a tirelessly devoted servant, sacrificing every penny and every ounce of my energy for her, to the point where I didn't even own a decent winter coat. None of it mattered anymore. Knowing Greg would be rushing home soon, I grabbed the suitcase, unzipped it, and violently dumped all of Chloe's belongings onto the floor. I grabbed my driver's license, my social security card, my phone, and whatever cash I had stashed away, shoved them into my purse, and sprinted out the back door. I had already booked a Greyhound bus ticket out of state earlier that day, but to ensure Greg couldn't track my manifest, I hailed a cab straight to O'Hare International Airport and purchased a one-way, first-class ticket to a completely different city on the West Coast. Without the dead weight of that treacherous child dragging me down, navigating the security lines and boarding protocols was incredibly smooth. 2 hours later, I was strapped into a leather seat, soaring 30,000 feet above the clouds, permanently leaving behind the city that had been my suffocating prison for over 3 decades. Unlike my previous life, I didn't completely destroy my old SIM card. Instead, I carefully placed it into a cheap, prepaid burner phone I had purchased at an airport kiosk. The little sociopath thought Greg was the greatest man on earth, right? I couldn't wait to see what kind of heavenly life she would live under his roof, without me there to absorb his wrath. I assumed Greg, grateful for his loyal little informant, would at least maintain the facade of a loving father for a few days. I severely overestimated the man's capacity for human decency. The moment I stepped off the plane into the cool, drizzly air of my new city, I powered on the burner phone. It nearly vibrated out of my hand. The notifications flooded in, like an avalanche. Opening my iMessage app, the very first thing I saw was a photo of Chloe. Her nose was bloody, her eye was swollen shut, and a dark purple bruise was already blossoming across her jawline. It was accompanied by a voice note from Greg. His voice slurred with alcohol and raw malice. "Hannah, you better get your pathetic ass back here right now. If you don't walk through that front door, I'm going to beat this useless waste of money to a bloody pulp." When Greg was in a blind rage, he didn't care who was in front of him. He had always been perfectly willing to beat his daughter. I was simply the one who threw my body over hers every single time. I had taken the fractured ribs, the concussions, the busted lips so she wouldn't have to. I used to think she understood my sacrifice. I thought she recognized my suffering. I never imagined that my protection had warped her tiny narcissistic brain into believing that her father only liked to hit me, and that she was somehow immune. Karma had arrived with spectacular speed. Had this been my previous life, seeing that photograph of Chloe's battered face would have triggered a panic attack. I would have felt as though my heart was being ripped from my chest. But standing outside the terminal, breathing in the fresh air, I felt nothing but an overwhelming, intoxicating sense of euphoria. A genuine smile spread across my face. I leaned against a concrete pillar, typed out a quick response, and hit send. "She's your daughter. I have total faith you'll take excellent care of her. Rooting for you." As soon as the message delivered, I powered the burner phone off and tossed it into my bag. Domestic abusers never stop at just one beating. The dam had broken, and this grand performance of father-daughter bonding was only in its opening act. I needed to rest up, get a good night's sleep, and prepare myself to watch the rest of the show. I spent the next week quietly settling into my new life. I rented a secure, gated apartment under an assumed LLC, stocked the fridge with high-quality groceries, and bought myself the luxury clothes I had always been denied. I felt lighter. The chronic pain in my shoulders, born from a decade of cowering in fear, was finally beginning to dissipate. It wasn't until a full 7 days later that I finally pulled the burner phone out of my drawer and turned it back on. The device immediately froze, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of data trying to push through the network. When the screen finally cleared, I saw that I had over 500 missed calls. I scrolled through the endless wall of red notifications. My thumb paused. I narrowed my eyes, locking onto a familiar, yet entirely unwelcome number. Sarah. Sarah was my cousin-in-law. Like me, she lived in the suffocating, terrifying shadow of severe domestic violence. Her husband was a ruthless drunk, who used her as a punching bag on a weekly basis. The worst incident had happened 2 years ago when he literally threw her out of a second-story window. She had shattered her leg upon impact, before the plaster cast had even come off. He had beaten her again, causing severe internal bleeding. Because of our shared miserable existence, Sarah and I had formed a trauma bond. We were incredibly close, and I had foolishly believed we shared a sisterhood of survival. In my previous life, right before I fled Chicago, I had tearfully texted Sarah to say goodbye. She had responded immediately, begging me to meet her at a local diner for one last meal before I left. I had only declined because I was terrified of missing my train. It was only much later, during the police investigation of my murder, that I discovered the truth. The second Sarah received my goodbye text, she had called Greg, They had concocted a plan. She was going to lure me to the diner, serving me up on a silver platter, so Greg could ambush me. If I had gone to that lunch, I wouldn't have even needed Chloe to betray me. I would have been beaten to death in the parking lot that very afternoon. Back then, I couldn't comprehend it. We were both victims. We both knew the agonizing terror of hearing heavy footsteps approaching the bedroom door. Why would she intentionally send me to my slaughter? Now, with the clarity of a second life, I understood perfectly. Years of enduring endless, soul-crushing torture had completely warped her psychology. She was broken, twisted, and profoundly sick. The only way she could cope with her own hellish reality was by ensuring that I was trapped in the exact same hell, preferably an even worse one. She couldn't stand the thought of me escaping the darkness while she was left behind. It was the classic crab mentality. If one crab tries to climb out of the boiling pot, the others will violently drag it back down to burn with them. Sarah, much like my sociopathic daughter, was nothing but a willing accomplice to the devil. And in my grand plan for retribution, she absolutely deserved a front row seat to the fallout. As if sensing my thoughts, the burner phone vibrated in my palm. Sarah was calling again. A cold smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. I swiped the green button and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello," I said softly. Sarah gasped, clearly shocked that the call had actually connected. She paused for a second before launching into a furious reprimanding tone. "Hannah, where on earth have you been hiding? How can you just abandon your child like this? Do you have any idea that Greg is beating Chloe half to death?" Half to death. So she wasn't completely dead yet. What a shame, thinking back to the day I left to the snide, condescending smirk on Chloe's face as she told me to stop being so sensitive. I let out a long theatrical sigh. I pitched my voice to mimic Chloe's exact tone of bored irritation. "Chloe told me herself that her dad works very hard and gets very stressed out," I drawled. "Him hitting her a few times really isn't a big deal. She just needs to grow thicker skin and get over it." My precious daughter loved to be generous at my expense, didn't she? I was simply giving her the opportunity to practice what she preached. She must be thrilled. "Listen to me," Sarah pressed, her voice dripping with toxic, suffocating faux concern. "I know you feel wronged, but what marriage doesn't have a few bumps in the road? You need to come home immediately. If you wait too long and Greg gets truly angry, it'll be too late to apologize." The absolute absurdity of her words was almost comical. "And if I don't go back?" I challenged coolly. "What exactly is he going to do to me from across the country? A woman can't just drift around out there forever," Sarah lectured, her tone shifting into a condescending reprimand. "Hannah, you've always been a smart girl. Why are you being so stupid right now? Men are just hot-headed when they're young. Give it a few more years. Let him get a little older, and he won't have the energy to hit you anymore. You're so close to the finish line. Why are you throwing it all away?" I stared at the wall, genuinely struck speechless by the Olympic-level mental gymnastics of her Stockholm Syndrome. No wonder she was beaten to the point of needing a permanent medical bag and still refused to leave her husband. Character truly is destiny. Some people's spectacular ignorance makes them the perfect candidates for the misery they endure. Taking my silence as submission, Sarah grew energized. "Pack your bags and get back here. I'll talk to Greg for you. I'll make sure he goes easy on you and only hits you a few times. Don't be ungrateful, Hannah. Did I have a masochism fetish? Was I supposed to fall to my knees and thank her for negotiating a lighter beating?" I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. "If you love living in a torture chamber so much, by all means enjoy it. But I am not like you. I'm not a glutton for punishment." Sarah choked, instantly infuriated by my rejection. "Greg is looking for you everywhere. He swore that if you don't come back, he is going to drive to the cemetery and desecrate your parents' graves. Don't say I didn't warn you." I rolled my eyes. It was the same tired script. In my past life, Greg had used this exact threat dozens of times to keep me in line. But he never actually did it. He was a coward. Even though my brother didn't care about me, he would never let Greg dig up our parents' graves. It would make our family the laughingstock of their rural county. And Greg was terrified of my brother's hunting buddies. "Tell him to go ahead," I sneered, fully aware that Sarah was undoubtedly recording the call for Greg. If he doesn't dig them up by tonight, he is a cowardly liar. Before she could respond, I delivered the final piece of bait. Actually, tell him to stop wasting his time at the graveyard. We live in the digital age now. If he wants to ruin my life, he should go on TikTok or Twitter and play the victim. Tell everyone I'm a deadbeat mom who abandoned her family. Who knows, with enough fake tears, he might just go viral, become a famous influencer, and make millions. I hung up and powered the phone down again. I had intentionally planted the seed. The ancient Greeks said it best: whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad. Greg loved nothing more than playing the pathetic victim. After every beating, he would drop to his knees, slap his own face, and cry theatrical tears begging for my forgiveness. With acting skills like that, he was destined for a broader audience. I was going to build him a towering pedestal of fame, just so I could kick the pillars out from underneath it, and watch him shatter into a million irreparable pieces. It didn't take long for the seed to sprout. Whether Sarah's gossip network was working at supersonic speed, or Greg was simply desperate to capitalize on any avenue of public sympathy, his debut on social media happened that very night. By the time I checked the internet the following morning, his newly created video had already gone viral. In the high-definition vertical video, Greg sat on the worn-out couch of our old living room, cradling my battered daughter like a tragic, sorrowful hero. Both of them were sniffling, their eyes puffy and red. Greg stared into the camera with a masterclass expression of profound grief, choking out a narrative that painted me as a raging alcoholic who routinely flew into violent, abusive rampages, neglecting her duties as a wife and mother. He claimed that after he gently tried to talk some sense into me, I flew into a blind rage and abandoned them without a trace. To make the performance complete, Chloe chimed in, weeping into her father's chest. "Mom, please come home," she cried for the camera, her bruised cheek artfully angled toward the lens. "I promise I'll be good. I'll do all the chores, I won't eat snacks anymore, and I'll never talk back." To ensure the public could hunt me down with maximum efficiency, Greg was kind enough to display my full legal name, a recent photo, and my state ID number at the end of the clip. A woman who was a raging alcoholic, in the history of modern domestic crises, that had to rank as one of the most creatively fabricated myths ever conceived. But human nature on the internet is a fickle beast. People will swallow any absurdity if the production value of the tears is high enough. Within hours, the comment section exploded with righteous fury directed entirely at me. Thousands of strangers, convinced they were defending an upstanding, heartbroken single father, flooded his page with words of encouragement and financial donations. They urged Greg to divorce me, file for full custody, and protect his innocent daughter from a monster like me. And Greg played his role to absolute perfection, leaning heavily into his new persona as the internet's most tragic good guy. He wiped away a tear and addressed the camera with trembling lips. "I know I'm not a rich man," he wept. "I know Hannah always despised me for not making enough money. But I'll work 2 jobs now. I'll do all the laundry. I'll cook every meal. I'll tutor Chloe every single night. Just please, baby, come back to me. I'll do whatever you want." Watching the performance from the safety of my high-end West Coast apartment, I couldn't help but marvel at the man's shamelessness. In the decade we were married, Greg hadn't so much as lifted a finger to wash a single dish, let alone help with household chores. The $2,000 monthly household budget had always been doled out like a personal favor, requiring me to beg on my knees before enduring a round of physical punishment, just to secure grocery money. As for Chloe, the precious child I had guarded with my life since the day she was born, she had never wanted for anything, yet she sat there on camera selling me out without a single flicker of hesitation. My hands curled into tight fists. The sheer fury was enough to make my teeth ache. But patience was a virtue, and my trap needed a little more time to mature before I sprang it shut. Greg's follower count skyrocketed from a few hundred to nearly 500,000 within 48 hours. Brands and shady local sponsors immediately caught wind of the digital traffic, sliding into his direct messages to offer him brand deals and live streaming endorsement opportunities. An overnight transformation from a low-level transit worker to a digital celebrity. It was intoxicating. Greg was too blinded by the influx of cash and digital validation to realize he was dancing directly on the edge of a cliff. Fortunately, I had anticipated this exact scenario. My physical location was entirely locked down. I ordered my groceries through encrypted delivery apps, stayed off public streets, and used a clean burner profile to watch the circus unfold. It was time to escalate the game. I powered on the burner phone once more, drafted a direct message to Greg's public account, and hit send. Greg, you can lie to strangers all you want, but you and I both know the truth. The scars on my body from your beatings don't lie. The moment I step into the light, your entire house of cards will collapse. True to form, Greg's phone was glued to his hand. He replied within 30 seconds, clearly terrified that my voice would puncture his carefully curated narrative. Hannah, you finally answered. I was wrong. I'm so sorry. Please come home. I'm a big influencer now. I can take care of you properly. Immediately afterward, his direct line started ringing. I swiped the screen and hit record. Hannah baby please. His voice broke over the audio line, oozing manufactured desperation. I know you were mad because I couldn't provide, but look at me now. I'm making money. I'm famous. We can live like kings. Just get back here. You're a monster, Greg, I said coldly. My voice steady and devoid of emotion. You can fool millions of strangers. But the medical records, the police logs, and the permanent damage to my body are immutable facts. Stop your disgusting performance before I destroy you completely. You're the one destroying this family. Greg's facade slipped for a microsecond. A flash of his true venomous malice bleeding through the audio. You brought this on yourself, Hannah. Don't push me too far, or you'll regret it. I hung up, saved the audio file to a secure cloud drive, and powered the phone down. I knew how his mind worked. Greg was a cowardly bully who possessed zero emotional control. The sudden wave of fame had bloated his ego. But deep down, he was terrified that I would expose him and ruin his new meal ticket. He had two choices: beat Chloe harder to force me out of hiding through sheer guilt, or hire digital trackers to hunt down my location, given that my phone was burner registered and untraceable. Option 1 was much cheaper and closer to home, and that brings us to the hidden cameras. In my previous life, during the final year of our marriage, I had quietly installed high-definition, cloud-synced mini cameras in our living room and kitchen, intending to capture undeniable video proof of his domestic violence for a future divorce attorney. When we fled in a panic, I completely forgot about them. It wasn't until I was thousands of miles away that I remembered the feeds were still active. I pulled up the live stream on my laptop. The camera lens, mounted high in the corner of the living room, provided an immaculate, unblinkingly clear view of the space below. The footage was a goldmine. In the video, Greg had just finished filming another tear-jerking, Oscar-worthy plea to the internet, begging for his beloved runaway wife to return. The second the red recording light on his ring light clicked off, his face curdled into an expression of pure unadulterated disgust. He whipped around and kicked a plastic storage bin clear across the room. Useless little brat, he roared, glaring down at Chloe, who was curled up on the rug. Go make me something to eat right now. If you mess up my order like you did yesterday, I swear I'll break your other arm. Chloe scrambled backward, her face pale, her body covered in the fading bruises from his previous tantrums. She didn't dare talk back. Yes, Dad. I'm going right now, she whimpered, scrambling toward the kitchen. And listen to me, Greg barked, stepping over her path. Keep sending messages to your mother from your burner account. Tell her you're in severe danger or going to do something drastic. Make her feel guilty enough to show her face. If she doesn't crawl back by tomorrow, I'll throw you out on the street. Chloe trembled. But a cold, calculated gleam flickered in her eyes. The exact same toxic manipulation I had witnessed 1,000 times before. Don't worry, Daddy, she whispered, her voice sickeningly sweet and compliant. Mom loves me the most. I'll send her a photo of a fake emergency setup. Once she sees it, she'll panic and run straight back into our hands. Then you can deal with her however you want. Greg grunted in approval, his face lighting up with sadistic satisfaction. Good girl, do it now. Watching the screen, a profound, chilling sense of finality washed over me. Some people cannot be saved because they are made of the exact same poison as their tormentors. In my past life, I had sacrificed my youth, my sanity, and ultimately my life for a child who viewed me as nothing more than a disposable shield and a convenient pawn. I downloaded the video clips directly to my local drive, archiving every single frame of their monstrous hypocrisy. The public execution needed a grand stage, and the time had finally arrived. I didn't rush. I spent an entire afternoon organizing the digital files into a clean chronological timeline, the medical documents, the audio recordings of Greg's threats, the explicit video footage of him abusing Chloe immediately after turning off his public live streams, and the chat logs proving their coordinated conspiracy to manipulate me into returning for further harm. When everything was polished and bulletproof, I logged into my primary social media accounts, the ones I had abandoned when I fled, and published the dossier in a single comprehensive post. Title: The Truth Behind the Tears. An open letter to the internet regarding Greg Thomas. I didn't add dramatic adjectives or emotional appeals. The raw footage spoke for itself. Within minutes of hitting publish, the internet erupted. The contrast between Greg's saintly, weeping online persona and the raw, unedited footage of him screaming obscenities, kicking his daughter across the floor, and plotting to trap me, was a cinematic flashpoint. The public felt utterly betrayed. People who had donated money to his live streams defended him in comment sections and attacked my character hours earlier, turned on him with the fury of 1,000 suns. What an absolute monster. He beat his kid on camera the second the light went off. Cancel this piece of garbage immediately. Call the police. Arrest this animal. The backlash was swift, merciless, and absolute. Media outlets picked up the story within the hour. News vans swarmed our old neighborhood, staking out the front door of Greg's apartment complex, like a colony of hungry vultures. Realizing his digital empire had collapsed into ash in less than 60 minutes, Greg tried to shut down his accounts. But it was far too late. The digital footprints were permanent. Simultaneously, my attorney filed formal legal proceedings. A multi-count civil lawsuit for domestic assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and criminal coercion, paired with a permanent restraining order, and an immediate petition for total, unencumbered divorce with zero shared assets. I also forwarded the complete package of security footage to the local precinct, ensuring that the state prosecutors had more than enough probable cause to pick him up on felony charges. The legal system moved with satisfying velocity. When backed by a viral public scandal, by evening, local news channels broadcasted live footage of Greg being hauled out of his apartment in handcuffs, his face covered by a dirty jacket, screaming obscenities at the cameras as police officers shoved him into the back of a cruiser. As for Chloe, social services intervened immediately, removing her from the premises and placing her into emergency temporary protective custody, while background checks on extended family members were conducted. None of it concerned me. I sat by the window of my apartment, sipping a cup of hot chamomile tea, watching the rain streak softly down the glass. The heavy, suffocating weight that had anchored my chest for over 30 years had completely vanished. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text message from an unfamiliar number. A social worker handling Chloe's temporary case file. Ms. Thomas, your daughter is currently in state care. She has repeatedly asked to speak with you, claiming she regrets her actions and wants you to bring her home. What are your instructions regarding custody or visitation? I stared at the screen for a long, quiet moment. The little girl in the shelter was desperately hoping for her old safety net, the human shield who would step in front of the fists and absorb the blows, so she could continue playing her games unscathed. I tapped out a simple, definitive reply. I relinquish all parental rights and custody claims permanently. Please direct all future inquiries regarding her placement to her biological father's next of kin or the State Welfare Department. I blocked the number, turned off the phone, and tossed it into the back of a drawer. My past life ended the day I drew my final breath on that cold apartment floor. My new life began the moment I stepped off the plane into the crisp West Coast air. The legal documents for my permanent relocation, an enrollment in a prestigious international fellowship program in Europe arrived via courier. Later that afternoon, I picked up my passport, ran my fingers over the clean, unblemished pages, and smiled. The road ahead was wide, bright, and entirely my own. The destruction of Greg Thomas's public life was absolute and uncompromising. In the modern digital age, the pendulum of public outrage swings with terrifying velocity. The morning after my evidence went viral, Greg's employer, the Chicago Metropolitan Transit Authority, was flooded with thousands of furious phone calls. Coworkers who had silently suspected his dark nature suddenly felt emboldened to speak up. Commuters threatened to boycott the bus routes he drove. Facing a public relations nightmare, the transit authority didn't hesitate. They terminated his contract immediately, citing a violation of moral turpitude clauses that brought immense disrepute to the city. The digital sponsors who had advanced him money for brand deals not only canceled his contracts but filed aggressive chargebacks, plunging his bank accounts deep into the red. Greg, who had spent the last 48 hours drinking expensive champagne and bragging about his newfound wealth, was suddenly drowning in legal threats and debt. And then there was Crystal. Crystal was a younger dispatcher at the transit hub. Greg had been sleeping with her on the side, promising her that once he finished ruining his psychotic wife and secured his influencer fortune, he would marry her and buy her a mansion in the suburbs. She had even started sneaking into our apartment while I was gone. But the moment the viral tide turned, and Greg's true face was exposed to the world, Crystal vanished. She packed up her things, blocked his number, and quit her job to avoid the media circus, leaving Greg entirely alone to face the ashes of his ruined life. With Greg out on bail and drowning his miseries at a local dive bar to avoid the paparazzi outside his building, I realized it was the perfect window of opportunity. I needed my original undergraduate diploma and sealed university transcripts. I had spent years of my youth trapped in that suffocating marriage, sacrificing my chance at a master's degree to cater to a tyrant and a treacherous child. Now, I was in the final stages of securing a prestigious academic fellowship in Europe, and the admissions board required my original physical documents. I hired a private security contractor, a towering, no-nonsense former Marine named Marcus, and booked a quiet flight back to Chicago. When my key turned in the lock of the old apartment, the smell of stale beer and rotting garbage hit me like a physical wall. The place was a disaster zone. Empty bottles littered the floor, and the furniture was overturned. Sitting on the stained living room sofa was Chloe. She looked small, disheveled and miserable. When she heard the door open, she flinched violently, expecting Greg to stumble in with heavy fists. But when her eyes landed on me, they widened in sheer disbelief. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. Then, like a switch had been flipped, she leaped off the sofa and threw herself at my legs, her small hands grabbing desperately at my coat. "Mom, you came back for me. I knew you wouldn't leave me here. I knew it." Her blind, arrogant confidence was truly a marvel. Even now, after actively participating in a plot to destroy me, she somehow believed I existed solely to be her savior. I let out a cold, humorless laugh. I reached down and firmly pried her fingers off my coat, pushing her back. "You're overthinking it," I said, my voice as sterile as a surgeon's scalpel. "I came back for my university degree." Chloe froze, staring at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. Without giving her another glance, I walked past her, heading straight for the master bedroom to open the locked firebox hidden in the closet. "Mom, please," she sobbed, following me into the room, her voice rising in genuine panic. "I'm sorry. I was wrong, okay? I shouldn't have said those things. Dad has gone crazy. He hits me every single day. Take me with you, Mom, please." If apologies actually worked, what would we need the police for? I replied, pulling my sealed documents from the safe and placing them securely in my leather tote bag. From the moment this child had betrayed me, she ceased to be my daughter. She was an accomplice to my terrible end. If I simply forgave her because she shed a few desperate tears, the agonizing death I suffered in my past life would be completely meaningless. Chloe saw me zip up my bag, realizing I was actually about to leave her in this hellhole. Desperation made her careless. She lunged forward and grabbed my wrist. "Mom, I swear I didn't mean to tell him the address to the Oak Park rental," she cried hysterically, tears streaming down her bruised face. "He tricked me. He threatened me. If I didn't tell him where we were hiding in Oak Park, he said he would." Chloe abruptly clamped her mouth shut. The color drained completely from her face. My heart seized in my chest. A cold, sharp shock wave, vibrating through my ribs. Oak Park. In my previous life, the cheap, dingy rental apartment, where Greg had kicked down the door and mortally injured me, was located in Oak Park. But in this life I had never gone to Oak Park. I had immediately boarded a plane to the West Coast. There was absolutely no way Chloe could know about the Oak Park address in this timeline, unless... I turned slowly, fixing her with a gaze so dark and piercing it seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. "You remember," I whispered. The horrifying realization clicking into place. "You were reborn too." Chloe trembled so violently her teeth began to chatter. She backed away, her eyes wide with a terror she couldn't mask. "Mom, you too." "Yes," I said smoothly. "I was reborn too." Smack! My palm struck her cheek with enough force to send her sprawling onto the dirty carpet. "I originally thought I had no reason to forgive you," I spat, looking down at the creature I had once loved more than life itself. "But now I have every reason to make sure you pay." She hadn't just been a naive, manipulated child. She had lived through the aftermath of my tragic end. She had defended my abuser in court. She had lived a full life with him, knowing exactly what she had done. And when she was given a second chance, her first instinct wasn't to save me. It was to complain that I was making too much of a fuss over being abused, and to set me up all over again. I stepped over her sobbing form, and walked out of the apartment, the heavy security presence of Marcus shadowing me into the hallway. The air outside felt incredibly crisp and clean, washing the stench of that cursed apartment from my lungs. But I wasn't quite finished. I pulled out my phone, navigated to my blocked contacts, and temporarily unblocked Greg. Before I left the living room, my phone had been quietly recording audio. I clipped the exact segment where Chloe was hysterically begging me to take her away, crying about how crazy and abusive her father was, and how much she hated him. I attached the audio file and sent it directly to Greg's phone. I added a short, simple caption: "Keep your treacherous daughter on a tighter leash. Tell her to stop begging me to save her from you." Greg was a man defined by a toxic, fragile ego. In his twisted mind, his wife and child were his exclusive property, objects meant to absorb his rage without a single whimper of defiance. Right now, he was a humiliated, disgraced pariah, a man who had lost his job, his money, and his reputation. He was a powder keg desperately searching for a spark. Hearing his loyal daughter groveling to the woman who had ruined his life, calling him a monster and begging to abandon him, would absolutely push him over the edge of sanity. Let them reap exactly what they had sown. Chloe used to preach about how Greg's beatings were just an expression of stress, that a few bruises were the price of a complete family. It was time for her to bear the full weight of that family's love. Greg was a creature of immediate explosive action. He didn't wait. Less than an hour later, according to the police scanner and the subsequent news updates, Greg stormed back into the apartment in a drunken blind rage. The beating was catastrophic. Chloe's screams echoed through the thin walls of the building. But unlike my previous life, she didn't have me there to throw myself over her small body. She absorbed every kick, every punch, every shattered glass directly. Fortunately for her, she had better luck this time around. The neighbors, already heavily biased against Greg due to the viral news scandal, had absolutely zero tolerance for his noise. One of them immediately dialed 911, reporting a violent assault in progress. The Chicago police arrived in minutes, kicking the door off its hinges. They dragged Greg off the bloodied child and immediately threw him in the back of a squad car. Since he was already out on bail, this secondary violent offense meant his bail was instantly revoked. He was locked up in the county jail, facing an upgraded stack of felony child abuse charges. Chloe, battered and barely conscious, was rushed to the pediatric wing of the local hospital because I had formally surrendered all custody and visitation rights to the state. And I was entirely unreachable. Child Protective Services had no choice but to contact Greg's next of kin, his mother Edith. Edith was a bitter, profoundly misogynistic woman who lived in a decaying house in the rural outskirts of the state. She had spent her entire life worshipping men and treating women as livestock. From the day Chloe was born, Edith hadn't bothered to hide her disappointment that the baby lacked a Y chromosome. Now, forced to take a bus into the city to sit beside the hospital bed of a broken little girl, Edith unleashed her own brand of psychological torture. "You miserable, worthless burden," Edith shrieked at the bruised child, pacing around the hospital room. "He just hit you a few times. So what? And you let the cops arrest your own father? You are a curse on this family." Chloe, covered in bandages and hooked up to an IV, lay silently in the bed. "Stop crying, you little jinx," Edith sneered, slapping the edge of the bed. "Who is going to pay this hospital bill? Hurry up and get discharged, so you can go beg that unfaithful mother of yours to come back. Don't just lay there being an eyesore." Some people are simply born with a tragic affinity for suffering. For nearly a decade, I had catered to Chloe's every whim, wrapping her in a cocoon of warmth and safety. She repaid me with sneers, complaints, and a knife in the back. Now, facing an elderly tyrant who cursed her for breathing, the little girl with the memories of 2 lifetimes didn't dare to utter a single word of defiance. Karma is a flawless architect. The world was finally turning exactly as it should. The state of Illinois requires a mandatory cooling-off period for contested divorces. But given the overwhelming evidence of felony domestic violence, the viral scandal, and Greg's current incarceration status, my high-powered attorney managed to expedite the final settlement hearing within 30 days. The morning of the hearing, the Chicago sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. I arrived at the downtown family courthouse flanked by Marcus, my security detail, and my legal team. Greg, escorted by a bailiff and wearing an ill-fitting suit over his jail-issued undershirt, looked like a hollowed-out ghost of the man who had once terrorized me. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin sallow, and the arrogant sneer was replaced by a trembling, cornered desperation. The judge reviewed the terms of the settlement. I had contributed more than half the down payment for our apartment, and by all legal metrics, I was entitled to force the sale of the property and take my equity. Instead, I instructed my attorney to draft a complete surrender of my financial claim to the real estate, legally designating it as a lump sum. Finalized buyout of all future child support obligations for Chloe. My attorney had fought me on it in private. "Hannah, this is absurd. He owes you that money. You shouldn't leave him with the primary asset." "I don't need his money," I had replied calmly. "A cornered dog with nothing left to lose will eventually bite. Greg has lost his job, his reputation, and his freedom. If I take his house, he will spend the rest of his miserable life hunting me down just to spite me. If I leave him the house, he'll cling to it like a life raft, forever trapped in his own rotting kingdom. Besides, with my new fellowship in Europe, and my absolute freedom, wealth was something I could easily build on my own terms." When the judge's gavel finally fell, declaring the marriage irrevocably dissolved, I felt a physical weight lift from my spine. The invisible chains that had bound me to that monster for 10 agonizing years disintegrated into dust. Greg stared at me from across the mahogany table. His lips moved as if he wanted to scream, to threaten, or perhaps to beg. But the presence of the armed bailiff kept him pinned to his chair. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a second glance. I turned on my heel and walked out of the courtroom. My head held high. Neither Greg nor the social workers brought Chloe to the courthouse. Whether she had learned her lesson after the last brutal beating, or she finally realized I was truly gone forever, the little traitor was nowhere to be seen inside the building. As we stepped out through the heavy glass doors of the courthouse into the bright sunlight, Marcus, my bodyguard, let out a low, amused chuckle. "Congratulations on your freedom, Miss Thomas," he said, holding the door to the waiting black SUV. "You know, when they brought him into the holding area earlier, I saw the scanner pick something up. He had smuggled a sharpened tool in the waistband of his trousers. Probably thought he was going to lunge at you in the lobby. But the second he saw the metal detectors and the deputies, he dumped it in a trash can. The man is an absolute coward, I smiled faintly, sliding into the leather seat of the car. He always was. Abusers are entirely predictable. They are apex predators only when their victims are isolated, weak, and terrified behind closed doors. The moment they step into the real world, confronted with genuine authority or equal strength, they shrink into pathetic, spineless shadows. The SUV pulled away from the curb, merging smoothly into the downtown traffic. I rested my head against the cool tinted glass, watching the city skyline roll past. As we paused at a red light on the edge of the courthouse plaza, my eyes caught a small familiar figure standing half hidden behind a concrete pillar. It was Chloe. She looked heartbreakingly thin. Her blonde hair was matted, and she was wearing an oversized faded jacket that clearly belonged to her grandmother. She was standing perfectly still, her hollow, bruised face turned toward the tinted windows of my departing car. Our eyes didn't meet. She couldn't see through the privacy glass. But her expression was a haunting mix of profound regret, terror, and irreversible loss. My heart gave a faint, involuntary flutter. The last dying reflex of a mother's instinct. But it lasted less than a second. I would never forget the agonizing despair of my previous end, the feeling of my ribs cracking while she watched, knowing she had intentionally led my abuser directly to my sanctuary. If I forgave her now, just because she looked pitiful, I would be betraying the ghost of the woman who died on that cold apartment floor. The light turned green. The SUV accelerated, and the small broken figure in the rearview mirror faded into the distance, permanently erased from the canvas of my new life. I truly believed the nightmare was entirely behind me. But I had severely underestimated the depths of Greg's toxicity and the darkness lurking within my former daughter. Because the prisons in Cook County were notoriously overcrowded, Greg's defense attorney managed to strike a plea deal with the district attorney. Rather than serving a decade in state lockup for his aggravated assault charges, Greg served barely a year before being released on strict parole. Stripped of all his assets, his reputation ruined, he was forced to move into a decaying, mold-infested trailer park on the desolate outskirts of the city. With Edith's health failing, the burden of his miserable existence fell squarely on Chloe. Greg refused to let her return to public school. Using the loophole of homeschooling, he locked her inside the claustrophobic trailer, reducing her to his personal unpaid servant. From dawn until dusk, she was forced to cook, clean, and cater to his every drunken whim. If the food was too cold, or if she didn't fetch his beer fast enough, the consequence was a brutal, merciless beating. But Chloe was not the type to endure suffering in silence forever. She was, after all, made of the exact same venomous material as her father. Pushed to the absolute brink of her sanity, the little girl finally snapped. One evening, after Greg had savagely kicked her for spilling a few drops of soup on the worn carpet, she quietly slipped out to the rusted storage shed behind the trailer. She found a large container of heavy-duty, industrial chemical substance, waiting until Greg was completely intoxicated and screaming at the television. She carefully emptied a lethal dose of the toxic powder into his greasy bowl of beef stew. Unfortunately for her, the chemicals in the shed had been exposed to years of extreme heat and winter frost, severely degrading their potency. The substance didn't kill him. Instead, it triggered a catastrophic neurological collapse. Greg suffered a massive stroke, leaving him permanently paralyzed from the neck down. When the paramedics finally arrived, Chloe played the role of the traumatized, innocent child to absolute perfection. Weeping hysterically into the arms of a police officer, she swore that her father had been completely blackout drunk. She claimed he must have accidentally knocked the container of pest control powder into his own food. While stumbling around the kitchen, she was only a child. Her performance was flawless, and the local detectives simply couldn't find enough concrete forensic evidence to prove a 10-year-old was capable of premeditated harm. The case was quietly closed as a tragic household accident, but Chloe hadn't won. She had inadvertently built her own permanent prison. With Greg completely bedridden, unable to move a single muscle below his jaw, the state assigned a meager disability stipend to the household. Chloe wasn't sent to a foster home. Instead, she was permanently trapped in that rotting trailer, doomed to spend the rest of her youth feeding a paralyzed monster, emptying his bedpans, and listening to his endless, slurred curses echoing through the cramped walls. They were permanently locked together, in a private hell of their own making. A few nights before my flight to Europe, I had a long, incredibly vivid dream. In the dream, I was a ghost, forced to watch the alternate timeline of my previous life. The life where Greg had literally beaten me to death. I saw Greg released from prison after serving his pathetic 5-year sentence for manslaughter. For a few brief months, he and Chloe played the role of the perfect happily reunited family. But Greg's true nature couldn't be suppressed for long. He quickly found a younger, desperate woman and remarried. Within a year, the new wife gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The moment the son arrived, Chloe became utterly obsolete. Greg's faint semblance of fatherly love vanished. He pulled Chloe out of high school the moment she turned 16, forcing her to work grueling minimum wage shifts at a local diner, just to pay for her little brother's expensive toys and private tutors. Every time she tried to pack a bag and run away, Greg tracked her down, dragged her back by her hair, and beat her mercilessly in front of his new wife. It was only then, broken, bleeding, and entirely abandoned, that Chloe finally realized the horrifying magnitude of what she had thrown away when she betrayed me. But the realization came far too late. The dream ended with Greg aggressively negotiating a financial payoff with a sleazy, wealthy businessman, twice Chloe's age. Under the guise of a traditional marriage, Greg essentially sold his teenage daughter to a predator to fund his precious son's college tuition. I watched Chloe being dragged away, screaming and sobbing, permanently trapped in the exact same cycle of terrifying abuse she had once condemned me to. When I finally woke up, my face was completely dry. The morning sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my empty apartment, casting a warm golden glow across the hardwood floors. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and walked out onto the balcony, feeling nothing but a profound, unshakable sense of peace. The universe, in all its chaotic mystery, possessed a perfect way of balancing the scales. Later that afternoon, I arrived at O'Hare International Airport. My security detail, Marcus, helped me unload my sleek new luggage. I shook his hand, thanking him for his flawless service, and walked through the terminal doors without a single backward glance. My passport was stamped. My gate was open. The prestigious academic fellowship in Berlin was waiting for me as the massive jet lifted off the tarmac, tearing through the clouds toward a completely new continent. I closed my eyes and smiled. The past was nothing but ashes. The road stretched out endlessly before me, and the path was finally under my own 2 feet.
That's all for today. I'm Lina. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing stories every week. Thanks for watching.